My mom called before the family dinner and said it bluntly, "Don't come, your job as a plumber embarrasses the whole family." I stayed silent, but exactly 5 days later they were the ones knocking on my door at midnight begging me to save the entire family. My name is Ethan Carter, and for most of my life people have known me for one simple thing. I fix pipes. Every morning in Westerville, Ohio, I wake up before the sun comes up. The air is usually cold, especially in late fall, and the streets are quiet except for the low hum of delivery trucks starting their routes. I make a cup of black coffee, pull on my worn work boots, and check the small notebook where I write down the addresses of the day's jobs. Most of them are simple calls. A leaking sink, a clogged kitchen drain, a water heater that stopped working right when a family needed it the most. Some people look at plumbing as a dirty job. They see the tools, the muddy boots, the long hours, crawling under houses, or inside tight spaces behind walls. But to me, it has always felt honest. When something is broken, you find the problem, you fix it, and you leave knowing someone's day is better than it was before you arrived. I've been doing this for almost 15 years. My truck isn't new. It's a white Ford van with a small dent near the back door, and the company logo half faded by the sun. Inside the van, though, everything is organized. Wrenches, pipe cutters, sealed tape, spare valves. Every tool has its place. People trust plumbers with parts of their homes they usually never see. Basements, crawl spaces, old pipes buried behind drywall. If you do the job right, most customers never think about you again. The water runs, the sink drains. Life moves on. And honestly, I like it that way. I live in a small one-story house on the edge of town, nothing fancy. A narrow driveway, a patch of grass out front, and a wooden porch that creaks a little when you step on it. Inside, there's a couch, a bookshelf, a kitchen table with 2 chairs and a window that looks out toward a row of maple trees. Some evenings after work, I sit on that porch with another cup of coffee and listen to the quiet. For me, quiet has always been valuable, especially when you grow up in a family where success is measured loudly. My younger brother, Brandon Carter, is the kind of man people notice the moment he walks into a room. Tall, confident, always dressed like he just stepped out of a business magazine. Expensive watch, perfect haircut, the kind of smile that belongs on a billboard. Brandon works in real estate development in Columbus, luxury apartments, office towers, big projects with big money behind them. When people in our town talk about success, his name comes up often. My name usually doesn't. At family gatherings, the conversations tend to circle around Brandon's newest deal or the latest building his company is planning. My parents listen proudly while he explains square footage investors and market trends. When someone asks me about work, the questions are simpler. Busy fixing pipes, I usually smile and nod. Yeah, I say, something like that. The truth is, I've never tried to compete with my brother. We just built different lives. Brandon likes the spotlight. I prefer the quiet places behind the walls where the pipes run and the work speaks for itself. When people ask about my family, I usually pause for a moment before answering. Not because I don't love them, but because the truth has always been a little complicated. My parents live about 20 minutes away in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus. It's a comfortable 2-story house with a wide front yard and a long driveway that curves toward a white garage. My father, Richard Carter, worked most of his life as a mechanical supervisor at a manufacturing plant. He believed in disciplined structure and the idea that success should always be visible. My mother, Linda Carter, spent years working part-time at a local library. She loved books, neat living rooms, and family dinners that looked like they came from a magazine. Every Sunday evening, she insisted we sit at the same wooden dining table even when my brother and I were already adults. From the outside, our family probably looked normal. But inside, there was always an invisible line that separated my brother and me. Brandon Carter was 3 years younger than me, but you wouldn't guess it if you watched the way my parents talked about him. From the time he was in high school, people described him as going places. He had confidence, the kind that made teachers pay attention and classmates follow his lead. He played varsity basketball, wore clean sneakers that somehow never got dirty, and spoke about the future like it was already waiting for him. I remember one evening, years ago, when we were both still living at home. Brandon had just returned from a college business competition. My parents sat at the kitchen table listening as he described his presentation and the judges who congratulated him. My father leaned back in his chair with a proud smile. "That's my boy," he said. "You're going to build something big one day." My mother nodded with the same quiet pride. I was standing near the sink washing dishes when I heard those words. At the time, I had just finished my plumbing apprenticeship and was working long hours learning the trade. My hands were rough from tools, and I smelled like copper pipes and sealant most days. No one asked much about that. It wasn't that my parents disliked my job. They simply didn't see it the same way they saw Brandon's future. His work sounded impressive at dinner parties. Mine sounded practical. When Brandon graduated from college with a degree in business and finance, my parents hosted a celebration that filled the entire house with relatives and neighbors. My mother baked 3 different cakes. My father gave a short speech about ambition and opportunity. I stood in the corner of the living room holding a paper plate and watched people congratulate my brother. He deserved it. Brandon worked hard and he was good at what he did, even I could see that. But that night was the first time I noticed something clearly. In my family, success had a certain shape. It looked like polished shoes, confident speeches, and impressive job titles. It did not look like a man who spent his days tightening pipes under kitchen sinks. I never argued about it. Some people chase recognition. I learned early that quiet work can still build a life even if nobody claps while you're doing it. Growing up, the difference between my brother and me didn't appear all at once. It formed slowly. Small moments, small comments, small choices that repeated year after year until they started to feel normal. When we were kids, Brandon always seemed to stand in the center of attention. Teachers liked him. Coaches praised him. Relatives talked about how confident he looked even at a young age. I was the quiet one. Not shy, exactly, just quieter. I liked building things in the garage with my father's old tools. I liked figuring out how things worked. If a faucet leaked or a bicycle chain broke, I was the one trying to fix it. My parents didn't discourage that, but they didn't celebrate it either. One afternoon when I was about 14, I spent nearly 3 hours repairing the old kitchen sink. The pipe under the cabinet had been leaking for weeks. My father had planned to call a repairman, but I asked if I could try first. By the time I finished, the leak was gone. I remember wiping my hands on a towel and feeling strangely proud. When my father checked the pipe, he nodded once. "Looks fine," he said. That was it. Later that evening, Brandon came home from school with a certificate for winning a regional debate competition. My mother placed the certificate on the refrigerator with a magnet. My father called 2 relatives to tell them the news. I stood in the kitchen and watched everyone talk about Brandon's future. No one mentioned the sink. Moments like that repeated throughout our childhood. When Brandon made the basketball team, we celebrated with dinner at a steakhouse. When I fixed the neighbor's broken sprinkler system for free, my father simply said, "That's useful." When Brandon talked about studying business one day, my parents smiled proudly. When I mentioned learning a trade after high school, the room grew quiet for a moment. Not angry, just quiet. Eventually, I stopped expecting applause. I focused on what I was good at. During my late teens, I spent more time helping a local plumber named Mike Dawson. He ran a small repair company in town and didn't mind letting me watch him work. Mike believed plumbing was a skill people underestimated. Everyone ignores pipes, he told me once, while tightening a valve under a bathroom sink until the water stops running. I liked that logic. There was honesty in it. You solved real problems. You helped real people. No speeches, no applause, just work. After graduating high school, I didn't apply to a 4-year college like Brandon eventually did. Instead, I started a plumbing apprenticeship. My parents didn't argue with the decision, but they didn't celebrate it either. Brandon left for business school the following year. My mother cried when she dropped him off on campus. I remember watching their car disappear down the road and realizing something quietly important. In our family story, Brandon was the future. I was simply the background. About 12 years ago, something happened that quietly changed the direction of my life. At the time, I was working long days with a small plumbing company that handled service calls across Franklin County. Most mornings started before sunrise, and most evenings ended with tired hands and the smell of metal and rubber still clinging to my clothes. One rainy Tuesday, I received a call from a local bank branch in Westerville. The receptionist said there was a leak in the employee break room sink. Nothing serious, but water had started dripping into the cabinet below, and they wanted someone to fix it before the problem spread. It sounded like a routine job. When I arrived, the building was quiet. A few customers sat in the waiting area while employees worked behind glass counters. I followed the receptionist down a short hallway to a small break room where the sink cabinet door hung slightly open. The problem was simple. A loose compression nut on one of the pipes had allowed water to escape slowly over time. I knelt down, tightened the connection, replaced a worn washer, and tested the line again. Within 15 minutes, the leak was gone. As I packed my tools back into the metal case, someone stepped into the doorway. She was holding a tablet and wearing a navy blazer with the bank's logo on the pocket. "You fixed it already?" she asked. Her voice carried the calm tone of someone used to solving problems quickly. "Yeah," I said, standing up. "Just a loose fitting." She stepped closer and glanced under the sink, examining the pipe for a moment. "Well, that saved us a bigger mess," she said with a small smile. "I'm Rachel, Ethan," I replied. Rachel Harper worked as a financial advisor at the branch. Most of her job involved helping customers plan savings, retirement accounts, and long-term investments. She'd explained that many clients came in feeling overwhelmed by money decisions. "It's funny," she said while we walked back toward the front desk. "People understand their homes better than their finances. Pipes make sense. Money feels invisible." I shrugged slightly. "Probably because if a pipe breaks, you see the water right away." Rachel laughed at that. Before I left, she asked a simple question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever invest?" I shook my head. "Not really. I just save what I can." She nodded thoughtfully, then leaned against the counter. "You'd be surprised how far steady saving can go if it's invested the right way." That conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. At the time, it didn't seem like anything important. But before I walked out the door, Rachel handed me a small business card. "If you ever want to learn about long-term investing," she said, "stop by sometime." I slipped the card into my wallet without thinking much about it. Back then, I had no idea that simple moment in a quiet bank hallway would eventually change almost everything about the future I thought I understood. For a long time, I didn't use Rachel's card. Life stayed busy. Plumbing work has a way of filling every hour if you let it. Pipes burst during winter. Water heaters fail without warning. Kitchen drains clog right before holiday dinners. Most weeks, I focused on finishing the next job, then the next one after that. But Rachel's words stayed somewhere in the back of my mind. You'd be surprised how far steady saving can go. About 2 months after fixing that sink, I found the card again while cleaning out my wallet. It was a slow afternoon, and I happened to be working only a few blocks away from the bank. So I walked in. Rachel recognized me almost immediately. "The plumber with the fast repair," she said with a small smile. We sat down at her desk near a window that looked out toward the street. Cars moved past slowly in the late afternoon light while she asked simple questions about my finances. How much I saved each month, whether I had retirement accounts, if I carried any large debts. The truth was simple. I didn't earn a huge income, but I had always been careful with money. I rented a modest place back then, drove an older truck, and avoided unnecessary spending. Rachel listened carefully while typing a few numbers into her computer. Then she turned the screen slightly toward me. "This is something called long-term compound growth," she explained. She showed me what could happen if someone invested small amounts regularly over many years. The numbers on the screen didn't look dramatic at first, but the longer the timeline extended, the more the growth accelerated. "What matters most isn't big deposits," she said. "It's consistency." From that day forward, I began setting aside part of every paycheck. Not a huge amount, Just steady contributions into simple index funds Rachel recommended. She explained the basics, carefully diversification patience, avoiding emotional decisions when markets moved up or down. I treated the process the same way I treated plumbing work. Step by step, year after year. Time passed faster than I expected. I changed companies once, eventually starting my own small plumbing service van. My days stayed busy crawling under houses and fixing pipes across town, but every month the investments continued quietly in the background. Rachel and I met once or twice a year to review everything. She never made the conversations complicated. "Think of it like pipes underground," she once said. "You don't see them every day, but they keep the system running." 12 years passed that way. Slow work, steady savings, patient investing. One autumn afternoon, Rachel called me into the bank for our annual review. She opened my portfolio on the screen and leaned back slightly. "You've been more disciplined than most of my clients," she said. I looked at the number displayed there. For a moment, I thought I had misread it. The total value of the investments had grown to just over $1.8 million. I stared at the screen in silence. The strange thing was that my life didn't look any different on the outside. I still drove the same plumbing van. I still wore the same work boots. Most people who saw me crawling under their kitchen sinks would never imagine the quiet financial foundation that had been building beneath my life all those years. For a long time, Rachel and I only spoke during financial reviews, once or twice a year. Sometimes we exchanged quick emails about small adjustments to the portfolio, but our relationship stayed professional. She handled many clients, and I was just one quiet plumber who showed up on time and followed her advice. That was enough for me. Then, one evening, something changed. It was a Friday night in early spring. I had just finished dinner and was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when I opened Instagram out of habit. I didn't post much myself, but sometimes I looked through updates from people around town. That's when I saw the photo. At first, I didn't think much of it. A restaurant table, soft lighting, 2 wine glasses. But when I looked closer, I recognized the people sitting there. One of them was Rachel. She was smiling at the camera, leaning slightly toward the man beside her. The man was my brother, Brandon. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Brandon rarely posted photos with the same person twice, but the caption under the image made it clear this wasn't a casual dinner. Great night with someone special. I leaned back slowly in the chair. Of course, there was nothing strange about 2 adults dating. Brandon met people constantly through his work in real estate. Restaurants, business events, networking parties. And Rachel lived and worked in the same region. Still, the coincidence felt strange. 2 parts of my life that had always existed separately had suddenly collided in a single photo. The following week, I had a scheduled review meeting at the bank. When I walked into Rachel's office, everything felt normal at first. She greeted me with the same calm smile and pulled up the familiar charts showing long-term growth. We talked about market trends, interest rates, future projections. But halfway through the meeting, she paused. "I should probably mention something," she said. Her tone sounded slightly hesitant. I nodded. "I saw your Instagram post," I said before she could continue. For a moment, Rachel looked surprised. Then she laughed quietly. "Well, that saves me the awkward explanation." She folded her hands on the desk. "Yes," she said. "Brandon and I met a few months ago at a real estate event. We've been seeing each other since then." I studied her face while she spoke. Rachel didn't look nervous. If anything, she seemed thoughtful, like she understood the situation might feel unusual. "I didn't realize you 2 were related at first," she added. "Your last names didn't connect in my head until later." "That happens," I said calmly. In truth, I didn't know what to feel. Brandon and I lived very different lives. Our paths almost never crossed outside of family gatherings. The idea that my financial advisor was dating my younger brother felt strange, but not necessarily wrong. Rachel watched me carefully for a moment. "Is that uncomfortable for you?" she asked. I thought about the question. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. And at that moment, I believed it. A few weeks later, my mother called to remind me about the upcoming family dinner. Sunday evening, she said, everyone will be there. Family dinners had always followed the same pattern. My mother cooked too much food, my father opened a bottle of wine, and Brandon usually arrived last, stepping into the room with the relaxed confidence of someone used to attention. That evening was no different. When I pulled into the driveway, Brandon's black Mercedes was already parked near the garage. The porch lights were on, and through the front window I could see silhouettes moving around the dining room. Inside, the house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic bread. My mother greeted me quickly and pointed toward the living room where my father and Brandon were talking. Rachel was sitting beside Brandon on the couch. When she noticed me, she smiled politely. "Ethan," she said. "Rachel." The moment felt slightly awkward, but we both handled it like professionals who had already shared that conversation weeks earlier. Dinner started about 20 minutes later. Everyone sat around the long wooden table my parents had owned for years. Plates were passed, glasses were filled, and the usual family conversation began. For a while, everything stayed comfortable. My father asked Brandon about his newest development project in Columbus. Brandon leaned back in his chair and spoke with easy confidence. "It's a mixed-use complex," he explained. "Retail space on the ground floor, apartments above. Investors are very interested." My parents listened closely. My mother nodded with pride. "That sounds impressive," she said. Eventually, my father glanced toward me. "And you, Ethan? Busy fixing pipes these days?" I gave a small shrug. Always something leaking somewhere. A few people chuckled lightly. Brandon lifted his glass and smirked. "Well," he said, "at least someone in the family knows how to deal with clogged systems." His tone carried the same teasing edge he'd used since we were teenagers. My mother gave a soft laugh, trying to keep the moment light. But Brandon wasn't finished. He gestured casually toward me with his fork. "You have to admire the dedication," though, he continued. "My older brother here still drives around fixing sinks while the rest of us try to build actual businesses." The table grew quieter. I kept eating, pretending not to notice. Rachel, however, stopped moving her fork. She looked from Brandon to me and then back again. "Ethan runs his own company now, right?" she asked. I nodded once. "Just a small service business?" Brandon shrugged. "Sure," he said lightly. "Someone has to do the dirty jobs." Rachel set her fork down. Her expression remained calm, but her voice changed slightly. "You know," she said, "discipline matters more than job titles sometimes." Everyone looked at her. Brandon smiled, as if amused. "Is that financial advisor wisdom in a way?" she replied. Then she turned toward my parents. "I probably shouldn't share client details," she said carefully, "but I can say this much." She paused for a moment. "In 12 years of working with people's finances, Ethan is one of the most disciplined investors I've ever seen." The room went completely quiet. My father frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Rachel leaned back in her chair. "I mean," she said calmly, "that his long-term investment portfolio recently passed $1.8 million. No one spoke. My mother blinked. Brandon's smile faded slowly, and for the first time that evening, every pair of eyes at the table was focused on me. For the rest of that dinner, the atmosphere felt different. Not loud, not dramatic, just shifted. The conversation slowly returned to safer topics. My mother asked Rachel about her work at the bank. My father discussed interest rates and housing prices with Brandon. Plates were cleared. Coffee was poured. But every now and then I caught someone glancing in my direction. It was subtle, curious, as if they were seeing me through a slightly different lens. I didn't say much about the investments. Rachel didn't bring them up again either. She'd already said more than she normally would, and I could tell she realized it. Still, the information had landed. When dinner ended, I helped my mother carry dishes to the kitchen. She stood at the sink rinsing plates while I stacked them beside the dishwasher. After a moment, she spoke quietly. "Rachel said something interesting tonight." I nodded. She probably shouldn't have shared that. My mother dried her hands on a towel and turned toward me. "Is it true?" she asked. I didn't see a reason to lie. "Yes." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That much?" "It built slowly," I said. "Over a lot of years." She studied my face like she was trying to understand something she had missed before. "Well," she said eventually, "that's impressive." I simply shrugged. In the living room, Brandon was speaking with my father near the window. Their voices were low, but I noticed Brandon's posture had changed. His shoulders were tighter. His usual relaxed confidence seemed slightly forced. A few minutes later, I said goodbye and stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky above the neighborhood was clear. Porch lights glowed along the street as I walked to my van. I thought the evening was over, but 3 days later my phone rang while I was finishing a repair job in a basement. The caller ID showed my father's number, and that was unusual. He rarely called during the workday. I answered while wiping dust from my hands. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded serious. "Ethan, are you busy right now? I'm finishing up a job." There was a brief pause. "Your mother and I were hoping to stop by your place tonight." I frowned slightly. That's a long drive just to visit. Another pause followed. Then my father spoke more quietly. "We need to talk about Brandon." Something in his tone made me stop what I was doing. What about him as going through a difficult situation? Later that evening, I pulled into my driveway just as my parents' car arrived behind me. They stepped out slowly. My mother looked worried. My father looked tired. We walked inside and sat at my small kitchen table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, my father folded his hands together. "Brandon has a financial problem," he said. My chest tightened slightly. "What kind of problem?" My mother exhaled slowly. "A large one." My father looked down at the table before continuing. "He owes about $640,000. For a moment, the number sat in the air like a weight. $640,000. In my line of work, that kind of money could represent decades of labor, thousands of repair jobs, years of waking up before sunrise and crawling through tight crawl spaces under houses. I looked from my father to my mother. Neither of them met my eyes. "How does something like that happen?" I asked quietly. My father rubbed his forehead. "An investment project," he said. "A development deal that collapsed faster than expected. The market shifted, partners pulled out, and suddenly Brandon was responsible for far more than he planned." My mother clasped her hands together. "He thought the investors would cover most of the risk," she said softly. "But when everything fell apart, the responsibility landed on him." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "And the banks, they're demanding repayment," my father replied. "How soon?" My parents exchanged a quick glance. "Soon," my mother said. The kitchen felt very quiet. The small clock on the wall ticked steadily while I processed the information. Brandon had always spoken confidently about his projects. Large buildings, expanding markets, investors eager to participate. From the outside, his life looked polished and successful, but numbers can hide problems for a long time before they finally surface. My father cleared his throat. "He hasn't told many people yet," he said. I nodded slowly. "So why are you telling me?" My mother looked at me with an expression that mixed worry and hesitation. "Because you're his brother." There it was. The sentence hung between us. Family responsibility, support in difficult moments. I understood the message before they even finished explaining it. "You want me to help," I said. Neither of them answered immediately. My father finally spoke. "We're not asking you to solve everything," he said carefully. "But after what Rachel mentioned at dinner, we realized you might have the ability to ease some of the pressure." I stared at the table for a moment. The strange thing was that I didn't feel angry, just thoughtful. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated on the table. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. I excused myself and stepped onto the porch to answer. "Hey," I said. Her voice sounded serious. "Ethan, I need to tell you something important." I leaned against the porch railing. "What's going on?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Rachel spoke quietly. "I ended things with Brandon yesterday. That caught my attention." "You broke up, yes. Why?" Rachel exhaled slowly, because I realized something that made me very uncomfortable. The night air felt cooler against my face as I listened. "What kind of something?" I asked. Another short pause followed. Then she said the words carefully. "Brandon didn't start dating me by accident." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Rachel's voice lowered. "I think he was trying to learn about your finances." I stood on the porch for a long moment after the call ended. The night was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. Rachel's words kept replaying in my mind. I think he was trying to learn about your finances. Inside the house, my parents were still sitting at the kitchen table waiting for my answer. Through the window, I could see my father staring down at his folded hands. I took a slow breath and stepped back inside. Neither of them asked about the phone call. My father spoke first. "Ethan, we know this is a lot to ask." I pulled out a chair and sat down again. "How much exactly does Brandon owe right now?" I asked. My father hesitated. $640,000, he repeated. "But the bigger issue is timing. Some of the lenders want payments immediately." My mother looked at me with worried eyes. I was under enormous pressure. I nodded once, but something inside me had shifted after Rachel's call. "Does Brandon know you came here tonight?" I asked. My parents exchanged a quick glance. "No," my mother said. "He doesn't want people to know yet." That answer told me more than they realized. The conversation ended soon after. I told them I needed time to think, and they eventually drove home in silence. For the next few days, I returned to work as usual. Pipes still leaked. Water heaters still broke. Life in Westerville moved forward exactly the way it always had. But small changes started appearing around town. The first one happened at a supply store where I often bought plumbing parts. A contractor I knew named Dave looked at me strangely while we stood in line. So he said casually, "I heard you're doing pretty well these days." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Just what people are saying." That was the first hint. The second came 2 days later when a regular customer mentioned something similar. "I didn't realize plumbing paid that well," she joked while I fixed her kitchen faucet. The tone wasn't hostile, just curious. But it felt odd. By the end of the week, the pattern became clear. Somewhere, someone had started talking about my finances. Small rumors traveled fast in a town like ours. Most of them sounded harmless at first. People speculating about how a plumber could build a large investment portfolio. But speculation has a way of growing. One evening, while eating dinner at a small diner near my house, I overheard two men at the next table speaking quietly. "Heard he got the money from some shady investment deal," one of them said. "Or maybe inheritance," the other replied. I kept eating without reacting. Rumors are like leaking pipes. They start small, but if someone keeps turning the pressure up, the water eventually spreads everywhere. And deep down, I had a strong feeling about who might be opening that valve. 2 weeks later, my parents asked if I would come over again. Just for a conversation, my mother said on the phone. Her voice sounded careful, the way people speak when they know something difficult might happen. When I arrived that evening, Brandon's Mercedes was already in the driveway. That told me everything. Inside the house, the atmosphere felt tense. My father sat at the head of the dining table. My mother stood near the kitchen counter pretending to organize plates that were already perfectly stacked. Brandon leaned against the window with his arms crossed. Rachel was there too. It surprised me. She sat quietly at the far end of the table, watching the room with calm eyes. No one spoke for a moment after I walked in. Then Brandon broke the silence. "So," he said, "the mysterious millionaire plumber finally shows up." His voice carried the same confident edge, but it sounded thinner than usual. I pulled out a chair and sat down. "I heard you've been busy talking about me," I replied calmly. Brandon gave a small shrug. "People ask questions, and you answer them. I share what I know." Rachel shifted slightly in her chair but remained silent. My father cleared his throat. "Let's keep this conversation respectful." Brandon looked at me again. "Fine," he said. "Then let's talk about the real issue." He stepped closer to the table. "You have money," he continued. "I have a temporary problem. Families help each other." The directness didn't surprise me. "What kind of help are you expecting?" I asked. Brandon placed both hands on the table. $640,000 solves everything." The room fell silent again. My mother watched my face carefully. My father stared at the floor. Rachel looked at Brandon, then back at me. I reached into the folder I'd brought with me and placed it on the table. Brandon frowned. "What's that information I said?" Inside the folder were several printed documents, property records, loan structures, partnership agreements, all public information Rachel had helped me understand. Brandon flipped through the pages quickly. His expression changed. "You've been digging into my business. I've been trying to understand the situation," I replied. Rachel spoke quietly for the first time. "Those numbers are accurate." Brandon's head snapped toward her. "You helped him." "I helped clarify facts," she said calmly. Brandon laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "This is unbelievable." I leaned back in my chair. "What's unbelievable is the story you've been telling everyone." His jaw tightened. "What story? The one where you imply I got my money through something illegal." For the first time, Brandon didn't respond immediately. My father looked up sharply. "Brandon, you didn't—" "It was just talk," Brandon interrupted quickly. "People speculate." I shook my head. "No," I said. "People repeat what they hear." The room felt heavier with every second. Rachel finally stood. "There's something else everyone should understand," she said. Brandon looked at her with anger now. "Don't." But she continued anyway. "When Brandon first started seeing me," she said slowly, "he asked many questions about Ethan's finances." My mother blinked. What kind of questions? Rachel met her eyes. The kind that suggested he was trying to measure how much money Ethan might have. The silence that followed felt different from the others. This one carried disappointment. Brandon pushed the papers away. "You're all overreacting," he snapped. I stood up calmly. "I'm willing to help," I said. Everyone looked at me. "But not by writing a check." Brandon laughed bitterly. "Then what's your great solution?" I picked up the folder again. "We solve the debt the same way any real business problem gets solved." I looked directly at him, with honesty and responsibility. I stood on the porch for a long moment after the call ended. The night was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. Rachel's words kept replaying in my mind. "I think he was trying to learn about your finances." Inside the house, my parents were still sitting at the kitchen table waiting for my answer. Through the window, I could see my father staring down at his folded hands. I took a slow breath and stepped back inside. Neither of them asked about the phone call. My father spoke first. "Ethan, we know this is a lot to ask." I pulled out a chair and sat down again. "How much exactly does Brandon owe right now?" I asked. My father hesitated. $640,000, he repeated. "But the bigger issue is timing. Some of the lenders want payments immediately." My mother looked at me with worried eyes. "He's under enormous pressure." I nodded once, but something inside me had shifted after Rachel's call. "Does Brandon know you came here tonight?" I asked. My parents exchanged a quick glance. "No," my mother said. "He doesn't want people to know yet." That answer told me more than they realized. The conversation ended soon after. I told them I needed time to think, and they eventually drove home in silence. For the next few days, I returned to work as usual. Pipes still leaked. Water heaters still broke. Life in Westerville moved forward exactly the way it always had. But small changes started appearing around town. The first one happened at a supply store where I often bought plumbing parts. A contractor I knew named Dave looked at me strangely while we stood in line. So he said casually, "I heard you're doing pretty well these days." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Just what people are saying." That was the first hint. The second came 2 days later when a regular customer mentioned something similar. "I didn't realize plumbing paid that well," she joked while I fixed her kitchen faucet. The tone wasn't hostile, just curious. But it felt odd. By the end of the week, the pattern became clear. Somewhere, someone had started talking about my finances. Small rumors traveled fast in a town like ours. Most of them sounded harmless at first. People speculating about how a plumber could build a large investment portfolio. But speculation has a way of growing. One evening, while eating dinner at a small diner near my house, I overheard 2 men at the next table speaking quietly. "Heard he got the money from some shady investment deal," one of them said. "Or maybe inheritance," the other replied. I kept eating without reacting. Rumors are like leaking pipes. They start small, but if someone keeps turning the pressure up, the water eventually spreads everywhere. and deep down I had a strong feeling about who might be opening that valve.